Great, fantastic. Thank you so much for letting me speak today and share this particular project. It's a project that I've been working on with my husband, Dr. Tim Marangon, for quite a few years now. So we're really excited to share it and hopefully help everybody improve the bane of existence, which is marking. So there goes my slides set to move. Perfect. So the structure for today's presentation is that I'm going to start off very briefly by talking through the problem that is created by marking. I'm very aware of the fact that a lot of us will have only just finished marking, so the trauma might be quite recent. So I'll try and move through it as quickly and as painlessly, as possible. But this is your trigger warning that we are going to go back to that place. I'm then going to talk to you about the approach that we have come up with before talking about some of the potential uses. I think what's really important when we get to the conversation about uses is, by way of background, I am a law lecturer. My background is in teaching law, not in statistics. So I'm really grateful to have come just after that fantastic presentation, because one thing that I'm hopefully going to show today is that the benefit of the approach that I'm going to demonstrate is a vast amount of data, and there are any number of different things that we can do with that data, especially if you have any understanding of statistics. So I'm hopefully going to be able to link back to that previous presentation that we've just seen. Okay, so we go to our problem. So when it comes to marking, there are largely three things about the process that I find the most devastating and exhausting. The first is the amount of marking that we have to do. I think that middle picture from Toy Story is the most accurate for me, which is here's your pile of marking, 20 minutes per essay, should be enough to read, analyse, critique and judge it. Oh, and don't forget to write formative feedback. We're all probably very much aware of the fact that the situation that higher education is in terms of trying to get as many students in as possible and also to provide timely feedback. We can all, I'm sure, accept the value that there is in timely feedback, but it's so exhausting to try and generate it when you have so many students. By way of context, at my institution, Aston Law School, we currently have 400 students on our programme in the first year, about 280 in the second year, and about 200 in the final year, and we're looking to increase it to 500 first year students next year. So the number of students that we have is increasing so much, but the amount of time that we have to get that marking done is often more reduced. Another side to the problem is that you can never underestimate the creativity of an undergraduate's mind. So it's quite often that I will be marking and students will write things that I'm really not expecting them to write. And marking does become quite an emotionally draining process. So I'm looking at the script, I'm wondering, when did I teach you that? What have you written? And then I've got to write feedback because I don't want to devastate my students, but I want to write my feedback in a way that encourages them, which takes a hell of a lot of mental load. There's only so many different ways that you can compassionately, if we link back to that first presentation, that you can compassionately say, this wasn't fantastic. So not only is the scale of the task so massive, but emotionally and mentally, it's also an exceptionally draining process. All for the final bugbear, which is our students not reading the feedback. So we all know that our students are particularly grade orientated, so they'll often look at the mark and then that beautifully crafted feedback that you probably spent evenings and weekends writing, taking all that mental load, probably won't actually be read by anybody. So it can feel like a real wasted effort. So when we decided to come up with a new way of creating our feedback, those were the things we wanted to tackle. So we wanted to make marking more efficient and quicker to do. We wanted to be able to make the most of the feedback that we generated. So it wasn't just going in my institution into Turnitin and existing on the internet somewhere but never being seen by anybody. And also, and which I think links to that mental load side, I was particularly keen on trying to design a system that would help us maintain standards and reliability. So I'm very conscious of the fact that, especially as a young academic when I first started, and I had to mark holistically all these pieces of work, I think about 20 scripts in, I lose the ability to see what a first looks like anymore. And I start to doubt myself. And then the imposter syndrome sticks in. And then more recently, when we've got cohorts of 400 students with maybe 4 members of staff marking, ensuring that there's any kind of consistent standard being applied is exceptionally difficult. So I wanted to design an approach that helped me to make sure that I could come up with a way to assess standards and make sure that my marking was as consistent as possible, which is where the approach comes in. So if you want to, you can either do it on your phones with the QR code, or in theory, in the chat, I've just posted a link to the Microsoft form. If you could do me a favour and just fill out that Microsoft form, don't have to think about it too much. Make sure that your email address is correct, because that will help to demonstrate how this process works. What should happen, I'm saying that because I'm now remembering that I didn't actually check or test it, so I'm really hoping it does, is this approach that we are pushing or suggesting makes use of Power Automate, OneNote, or email. So in essence, what happens is we have a Microsoft form that is generated with predetermined comments. Now, that's a task that you do before the assessment started, maybe using your indicative answer, thinking about what it is that the student might answer, what are the qualities of a high first class answer versus what are the qualities of an answer that's not going to pass. You might have comments from your rubric in there, skills comments, whatever it is you want your Microsoft form to include. You can constantly change and update this. So it's not once you create it at the beginning and it can't be modified. You can add to it or change it however you wish as the marking process goes through. What basically happens is you would fill out the Microsoft form, as I'm hoping it has worked. Once you've typed in your mark, typed in the different elements, clicked on which bits of feedback might apply, you'll then click submit in a second, and the presentation, so submit. And what then will happen is either it will take the information that you have clicked and populate a template. That's what Power Automate can do. That template can then be sent via email. So I am hoping that if people have managed to A, access the Microsoft form, and B, complete the Microsoft form, it should have sent some emails out to people with a populated version of the Microsoft form that they created. I'm trying to update my phone as I talk to see if it's worked. Yes, it looks like it has. Equally though, or you can have it go into a OneNote, which is what is demonstrated in the recording here. So there is the template, and that's the information that pulled from this particular demonstration. What you then do is you can then copy and paste the information from OneNote or from your email into Turnitin or into Blackboard assignments, and that's your students' feedback in the template. So just copy it straight in for the student to then see. So that's how the approach works. In terms of its uses, so the first thing I wanted to do was look at that, how to mark efficiently. It definitely is a quicker process. So what we have here is some examples of the fact that once this approach was created for a module, it was taking it takes about 50% less time in order to actually generate the feedback for a student's piece of work. So these are two examples. So one was an exam that I was marking, all qualitative law essays. Where I was ticking the boxes. It was taking me about 12 minutes in order to mark a 1,500 word answer. The 22 minutes is an example of how I was able to provide a lot of feedback. It was taking me, again, less time than it would have taken me to write it out completely freehand. But because the approach is so much more efficient, I have more time to provide more detailed, comprehensive feedback. Other members of staff have taken on this approach, so you don't just have to trust me. So the module leader for EU law at my institution had a go at setting up the approach themselves and said that it made marking way more efficient and increased the amount of detail I provided to a student. And crucially, this was also mentioned by the students. So a student, without being asked for feedback, so we didn't ask them to give us any to let us know what they thought of the feedback, completely independently sent a message to the module leader to say, by the way, a separate thanks for the feedback provided. It has been normalized within the school in my 4 years to receive very generalized feedback and no justification to the mark provided. But thanks to your feedback, I'm able to understand in great depth what I need to do to achieve a first. Had EU been in the first semester, I would definitely apply the feedback provided. So what this approach, because it's so much quicker to get that baseline feedback in, it means that there's so much more scope for you to provide really detailed, bespoke feedback to the students. Again, still making use of the form. It means that I can have pre-entered quotes. So it might be that I've said, oh, there's a problem with your use of authority. Well, I can, for example, use AI to help me generate a piece of feedback on how a student might improve their use of feedback, and that can be in the form ready to go. There's so much more feedback that you can provide in a really short, efficient time frame. Moderation, which is one of my other goals. This has really been a bit of it was a goal, but the amount of stuff that you can do with the data has massively increased. So I'm a bit of an Excel fan. No formal training on it, but I've played around enough to have a go with things. And just with my playing around, the amount of analysis that I can now do of my cohort's performance is vastly improved because the feedback's not going into Turnitin and getting lost. The feedback is accessible to me for me to analyze. So, for example, the picture that's on the slide at the moment looks at benchmarking across my assignment. So all that I did was using Excel, I pulled the data from the Microsoft form into different columns and color coded it. So when I color coded it, I made it green if it was a positive comment and red if it was a negative comment. So I guess a slightly more less statistical approach to what we just saw in the previous presentation of factors that I thought were going to impact on different grades. And then when I put my papers in order, the student that got 89 down to the student that got 25, I get a picture that shows my cohort, which means that if there is an outlier, I can really easily identify it. So I might, for example, look at the first student down that got 66, because they've got quite a bit of red in there, or the student that got 73, quite a bit of red at the beginning. Was I having a really good day when I marked that paper? Or equally lower down, I might look at maybe the student that got 49 because they had a lot of green towards the middle of it. So what are we definitely sure that that is a 49? There's also the scope for me to, building again on a non-statistic person's view of the analysis that we just saw in the previous presentation, I can look to see if there is anything unknown to me about what's impacting on my mark. So quite clearly, when I look at this picture, I can see that there's a lot of green over here. and then the red down here, which suggests that it's this bit of conversation, whatever these comments related to, that had a real impact on my mark. If they did well over here, they did well overall. If they didn't do well over here, they didn't do well overall. Is that what I want to happen? Is that analysis that I want to happen to, sorry, is that a marking anomaly that, or is it something that I need to pick up with the teaching? It just allows for greater analysis. Other benefits, and this is a more recent development, are that you can also use this to help you suggest a mark. So what we did here was we made use of Excel to code the comments. So when I click on the comments, if I clicked on comment 1, that in Excel was coded to be a first class comment. A comment 2 might be coded to be a 40. And what that means is that Excel can pull the data and populate it and automatically suggest a mark for me. I don't have to stick with that mark. I can change it. I always have marker discretion, but it gives me a benchmark. And it also means that if there's a group of people marking, it means that we can say, okay, we all clicked those boxes. We should all have given this a 48, or that was the mark it's suggesting. Is that mark accurate? Is there a problem with our comments, our grading initially? Why are we changing it? Which again then allows for far better analysis from a moderation perspective. So the Excel document or screenshot that you can see is marker J, marker L, and marker A. So we can see here that they all marked similar papers. But when they marked the papers, we can see which boxes they clicked, and I can see if there are any anomalies in terms of marks. So for example, down at the bottom, marker J and L both gave this paper 54. Marker A gave it a 45. So I can go through and work out where are the anomalies along the line. And there are quite a few along the line down here. Not so much with marker J and L, but marker A was very different. And then if I've got 400 papers and I know that marker A marked 100 of them, and I can say, oh, do you know what? Actually, they're out on referencing, they're being too harsh. I can go, okay, let's boost that mark up 1, and then I can see the numbers, and it makes it far easier for me to actually uplift and do proper moderation. In terms of other bits of data analytics, I guess one thing I want to say is that I'm sat here going, I'm a bit of an Excel geek. You don't have to be an Excel geek for this approach to work because Microsoft does a hell of a lot of it for you. So when you use a Microsoft form, if you haven't experience of that previously, it does some basic analysis for you of the results. So for example, really basic stuff. One assessment that we did, there were 2 questions. So because we used the form and we were clicking the box for which essay am I dealing with to help with the analysis of each question, it meant that I knew there were 33 essay 1s and 21 essay 2s. The only other way, if I have one submission portal to get that information, would be for me to sit there with my Turnitin open and keep a tally chart, which who has the damn time? And also, once I've marked an assessment, that's dead to me. I'm never going back in. It can also pick up things like, so the table here looked at what common bits of feedback did I say they need to work on? So 14 students need to push your critical analysis. Or down here, what do you need to watch out for? We could see that the most common comments related to unsupported statements, so lack of authority. And this means that I can then design interventions for my class that are informed by the data. So I can, by way of an example, when I marked this in module 1 that we do, 28 students got case name dropping, which is the equivalent of throwing in a reference but not explaining why that reference is relevant or how it proves the point that they're making. We then did an intervention in class where we talked about case name dropping and how to fix it. Second assessment came in, only 9 students got that feedback. versus the 28 that got it to begin with. So because I knew specifically what the issues were, I could generate it. I could go in and try and create a fix. Last one to show you, and then I can see the questions, so I'll answer the questions then, is supporting the student journey. So one of the flaws that we see with our modular approach is that students can't see across modules. They aren't making connections. And there's lots of research out there that suggests more programmatic approaches to assessment are really valuable for student attainment. But programmatic assessment means completely changing the modular structure, which universities are not going to want to do. So one thing that this approach does is it can allow you to pull data into an Excel document related to the entire student journey. So these were my personal tutees, for example. So what I could see is common feedback comments across the program that meant that as a personal tutor, I could step in and give some real valuable advice on how to improve. So for example, student 32, they received issues with application, so implicit application, declaratory application, declaratory application, declaratory application. That's their unsubstantiated application. So I know that as a personal tutor, I can help them with that. I can focus in on that, and that will allow them to see the links across different modules. But all of this is only possible because of that data. And I've helped people set this up, and loads of them have come up with some weird and wonderful things that they have done with the data. And I'm really interested in the previous presentation and looking at whether that statistical analysis could also apply to this more qualitative assessment as opposed to quantitative from that mathematical side. Okay, so the final thing just for me to say in this whistle-top store is I'm super happy to help set this up. We have got a toolkit that we can share where staff can have a go at setting it up themselves. I also run training on how to set it up. It is available in most Office 365 packages, so you should have access to it if your university subscribes to Office 365. But it's just to say that there are different levels of use. You do not have to start and go straight into all the statistical analysis. So an easy starting point is using it for generating formative feedback, so low risk, or using it in peer review. I've set up a Microsoft form and asked my students to use it for peer review. And then once they've clicked submit, automatically it's then emailed them a copy of what I would have given that piece of work, so they can see how well do they understand the marking grid. Are there any areas of confusion there? But it also means that the student's getting some quality peer review feedback as opposed to the one sentence that they can sometimes be given. You can use it for generating summative feedback, designing those targeted interventions that I mentioned earlier, such as the one for case name dropping, monitoring student progress, so that student journey, benchmarking and moderation, personalizing the feedback. So one thing that we're trialing this year is getting students to identify what they want feedback on a cover sheet, and then using the Microsoft form to help us really create targeted feedback towards that focus that the students identified. Assessing the assessment. So this is linked to that previous presentation that we saw. So this comes from an article that I read about assessing multiple choice items and looking at, I made notes, the item to total correlation that was mentioned earlier, seeing if that could apply to more qualitative assessments. And then automating boundaries, so that coming up with an idea for what the mark should be as a way of reducing some of that mental load. Okay, I've thrown so much at you really quickly. Any questions?